Hello,
Hi, Jane. Good morning.
good morning. Do we have an agenda today? I don't think so.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Uh, Six.
Hey, Max.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing okay? How are you?
The wind was howling last night for me, so I couldn't really sleep. Like it was rattling windows. It was crazy. Do we know if? Oh wow, I could hear my echo. Okay, I think it's gone. Do we know if Rita's gonna be coming today?
Not sure. I can't ping. I think that notification was from me. She's-
Let me turn on D&D.
I usually have sounds turned off. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the sound, like the email sounds and stuff. Yeah.
If I don't turn it on, I tend to miss notifications, so
Oh,
that I need to keep it on because
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah. Keep it on if if you're missing. Yeah.
sometimes I'm just focused that I don't notice that little corner.
Yeah.
What I don't like is when there's like a chat thread or whatever that like suddenly gets a lot of participation, but you're not interested. Bing, 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 bing. I think my cat is very happy to have me down here. I think she took shelter down here from the wind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do we know if Avinash or David are going to
Hello.
join?
Come to this meeting
Yeah.
today? I don't think so at this point. In general, yeah, you should probably see them again.
Was it a tiny cup, Max?
What's that?
Was it a tiny cup?
Oh, yeah, I have a tiny cup and then I
Uh.
have a cat that's asking for attention. Or maybe I just have giant hands and a giant head.
Yeah, could be. Or you can be an entire giant.
Hey, can you guys hear when I click my mouse?
Yes.
I can.
Interesting.
I have the MX2S or 3S or something like that. It's very silent clicks. So like
Yeah.
I'm clicking, like you can't hear it.
But I'm a little surprised it doesn't like block it, like the noise cancellation.
What kind of microphone are you using? The Max microphone or a different one?
This is the studio one.
Oh, the monitors.
Yeah.
Like okay. Maybe if you put it on the voice isolation mode, that might help.
Voice isolation.
Yeah. You know, in the top there's a camera green thing, and then there's a mic mode at the bottom of that. Click on this, what it'll say standard. Probably put it in the voice isolation and try it. Did you see it? Click it and then we can confirm.
Okay. Can you still? No?
No, I can't hear now.
Oh, nice. Now I
I'll
have
be
to
here
try
for
that.
your computer questions.
Huh?
I'll be here for your computer debugging and help
So
questions.
this is for Zoom. Like, does it work for Teams?
Yeah, this should be universal for everything that using the Max native sound APIs, I guess. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You can resume entering your passwords in Morse code.
Cute.
I'm guessing you can also do that. Like when somebody types in, you can like figure out what the password is from the keystrokes.
Oh yeah, that's a
Yeah.
thing.
Really?
That
But
was
then,
an attack vector.
Doesn't it sound the same? Sorry.
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Doesn't all key press sound the same? Like, how can you figure out?
No. I mean, if I remember right, they trained an AI model, and it may have been like keyboard specific. I remember they were talking about it on a Linus
Yeah.
tips show.
Now that you mention it, I think I also
Yeah.
heard something about this.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that's definitely possible. Yeah.
Oh, because like the keys would resonate in a different, because they live in a different part of the keyboard. You're gonna get like different harmonics.
But probably different from I think it'll be hard to do it like a generic one.
Yeah. Like I think you need to know the
Yeah,
keyboard.
like you need to have a target like in a specific environment.
But if you're using, say, a MacBook,
Yeah.
then the
Yeah, I can
keyboard
see that.
is
Yeah.
well known. Yeah.
And then it's just the environment is the factor. Yeah. So yeah. Cool. This is the gatekeeper tech tips.
I'm so happy right now. Like,
Paranoia hour with the gatekeeper.
no, because someone told me this yesterday and I got all paranoid. I'm like,
Rita
oh
is
no,
not clicking on the mouse. Like,
okay, thank you so much. And I just saw it. There's like there's settings for both Teams and Zoom. Like
okay, yeah.
yeah, it's the same mic mode. Yay.
Because you were multitasking and then yeah.
Yeah,
And
they
now
were like, by the way, we can all hear you clicking. And I was like, oh my God. So embarrassing.
Cool. Do you want to continue with the agenda?
Yeah, I see we have two items.
I'm
Yeah.
adding one. A big one.
For the first one, so I had some to-do items. I took over the GK maintainers group from Lucky. I gave you, Max, and Rita admin permissions, and then kicked off everybody that wasn't supposed to be in the group. So I think all three of us are in the group and admins, and so is I think Torin and forgot the last person's name from Styra. But then one of the Styra admins for all repos. So it just basically matches the maintainers at MD exactly. Torin and Tim. Okay.
Breaking changes. Sorry, I just am reading Rita's link.
Don't get distracted. I should not have put it in then. Focus
I'm
one
Yeah.
item at a time.
Yeah, breaking changes at the language level just infuriates me,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Don't
We
get
won't-
distracted. We will get to that item
get to that.
eventually.
Yeah.
After
Okay, so
this,
Jay,
yeah.
yeah. Sorry, finish.
Yeah, I think I was thinking we can add a J to the maintainers one unless there's an opposition.
To the maintainers permission set, to the maintainers .md and OPA, what
Both. So I want to make sure that they are both tracking the same, and we don't add like just like anybody in the maintainers group. So we keep it secure as possible, and only maintainers can merge PRs.
Okay, yeah, it will be good to have a maintainer who doesn't expire in March.
Oh, is it coming up again?
Yeah, it's like I kind of remember it by every new year. I'm like, it's coming up. You should check.
Yeah.
But yeah, having Jay be on a different cycle.
Yeah, Max is really good at the reminding of everybody to renew the license.
How do you remember these things?
Yeah, seriously.
It's like every time it's a new year. That's but also because I would really not want to figure out, because last time we sort of convinced ourselves that it was within a month of expiry that you could renew, and technically like the date has passed. So like, if we had forgotten any longer, I don't know what happens when you have forced your project to be leaderless by its own bylaws. Like, I really think we should change the auto expire after a year thing. Like, it has no effect other than like being risky.
What do you propose? Sorry, I missed.
Can you give me a little context on what is being expired?
All of our maintainerships. So if you go to github.com/openpolicyagent/OPA and you look at the governance file, it will say like maintainers are like active for a year but can be renewed. And
yeah, I also added in the meeting notes as a to do for you. You need to open a PR against that page, the maintainers page.
yeah,
But as
so
you can see, we're all expiring on March 3rd.
Oh,
yeah, and so like a lot of other projects just sort of have a more vague, if you become inactive, you can be booted. I don't think I remember them defining any specific like time frame for that. But honestly, to me, that's preferable because, again, when have we ever used the staleness clause versus when have we almost accidentally left the project purely abandoned? I mean, literally everyone would have lost their maintainership of all
Thanos.
repositories. What's that?
Thanos.
Yeah.
If some-
Oh no, he only eliminated half the world. um. Anyway, and it would avoid the need to remember.
This is the current clause for changing maintainership, right?
I think it's like 50% plus one.
I put it in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah. Got it.
So 2/3 majority vote, and then expires 1 year after 1 year, but a request for self-renewal can be made within 1 month of expiry. So basically, this is every year we have to basically update this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maintainers of an can be removed by 2/3. Okay.
Which, if someone is like not around, they're not going to vote against that.
But then this requires us to remember it versus like I think say like Kubernetes, right? It's basically no change unless someone steps down.
Yeah, and that's what I would prefer.
You okay, less onus on us to remember every year, right?
Yeah, we should the onus should be, oh, that person hasn't been around for a while and they didn't resign. We should like resign them. Or do what we did for Oren.
Yeah.
Where we just sort of let them expire.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you, who wants to propose this in Slack channel? Do you want to do it, Max, or should I?
I proposed it last time.
Oh, you did. I don't remember.
Oh yeah, this is like a year or two. I think I propose it every time I update the memberships. Like,
what did I say?
I think it just doesn't get any attention.
Okay.
Uh,
Do you want me to start again and then put a reminder?
I will vote for it.
Okay, sounds good.
You will.
Okay, I'll add it to my to-do list.
Sweet.
Okay.
So should I wait for raising a PR against maintainers MD or should I do it?
No, that's two separate things.
Yeah,
You should just do the thing anyway. Oh, but it says proposed by an existing maintainer. So does one of us need to open the PR?
I feel like
I don't think it matters. You're going to approve anyway.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Cool.
as long as one of us endorses it.
I just don't remember how strictly
Not at all.
Okay,
Not at all.
It's been a while.
Yeah, that's why the specificness is like awkward,
Yeah.
And there's other like awkward non-specificities, like do people who technically are not part of an organization get individual votes, whereas everyone else gets organizational level votes? That's a weird, merely theoretical, but a weird power consideration, right? Like you, Surtesh, Jay, all get one vote. But if you all decide to leave, do you lose your member or maintainership by virtue of leaving the organization? Or do you become an independent contributor? Now you all have 3 votes. Could you throw a coup by leaving your job? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of CNCF loopholes like that.
Yeah.
There's CNCF loopholes. Oh, good.
I think the more the case is like, actually, okay. Anyway, I'm not gonna say anything. Yeah.
Why not? What are you
recorded? It is like anyway.
Let's move on to the next topic.
Okay, so Jay will open the PR. Oh, which repos do we want? Gatekeeper?
No, the one that I linked, that maintainers one.
Oh, but no, in that there is like a repos section. So there's a frameworks, sort controller, that sort of stuff.
Gatekeeper library, right?
But also cert controller.
Oh, framework.
Oh yeah, frameworks. I think for sure. Frameworks, gatekeeper library, cert controller. Yes or no? He has done work on cert controller.
I say yes.
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if cert controller is like low key our most used.
It is used quite a lot. It's dependency for a lot of stuff.
I get surprised every time someone's like, I need this. I'm like, oh, okay.
There are actually few issues opened up recently also on cert controller. So maybe
Yeah.
if we have time, we can get to that.
I just noticed Surtash doesn't have framework.
I don't have frameworks. I also don't have access to that. The actual maintainers group.
Do you want to open up a PR
Sure.
Increase
Yeah.
for
your
yourself?
power.
Yeah. Okay, good. Move on. Next topic. All right. Cool. I think Jay, it's you again, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I saw the comments Max and Rita you guys have left on my PR. I addressed some of it. The last one that's outstanding is about swallowing that error for Rego templates where VAP is unable. Uh, so what I think is if user is using scoped enforcement action and mentioning VAP, uh, in that case, we should report the error where Rego templates are being used. Otherwise, we should swallow it.
Yeah, I'm like vaguely remembering the conversation about the scoped enforcement action versus just generic enforcement action. I think kind of what we had settled on in that old discussion was we should still surface the error as like a warning type thing on the resource, and users can either care to correct it or not, right? And the correction would be to use scoped enforcement actions. So I don't think we wanted to swallow the error, just because otherwise users might operate on the false premise that even though the template is written in Rego, we somehow were able to get VAP to work for them as an enforcement mechanism. Yeah.
Or an alternative could be like when we GA VAP enforcement point, we would just have a guidance that hey, if VAP enforcement point can be used, gatekeeper will integrate that. Otherwise, it's gatekeeper's webhook doing the validation.
The problem I have with that is that then it assumes it like puts it on the user to like look at the constraint template, right? Versus gatekeeper sort of knowing and it kind of gives an inconsistent meaning for the intent that the user expressed, right? Versus gatekeeper just taking the user at their word, right? And then saying, hey, you should probably know I'm not doing this one thing that you might be asking for, right? And I hear you that error might be a little bit too severe of like a way of reporting that, right? Because what you don't want then is users being like, there's an error, fix it. I deserve no errors here or whatever, because like errors are bad. But maybe that's about like the packaging of the text.
And Jay, to your comment, I wasn't saying that it must be when you use the VAP enforcement point. I was saying we should check if the engine is uh, the the solid engine or not. Like
So
it might. Hmm?
we do that right now.
But I think that was the bug from 3.17.0, if you remember, right?
Yeah.
Like we weren't checking is the intent to use the solid engine, right? If it is, then it makes sense to give the warning.
But that's the thing, right? Like we are assuming that constraint authors don't know what and how the template is implemented. So if constraint author says that I want to use VAP enforcement point, sorry, VAP, I want to do enforcement through VAP, but constraint template doesn't have the cell engine. Like it just has Rego engines. Uh, Does that mean we report the error or we don't? And if that means that we report the error, then when we enable the VAP enforcement point by default, that's the case. That is the case that's going to be for every Rego template, right?
But in my the specific check where you say what was it? The error, right? The error code not defined. That specifically checks for the source, right? Like the source has to exist. If it doesn't exist, that's where we return that error. So that is specifically checking if the intent was to use K8s, what was it? K8s native
So,
validation engine, right? If you're saying you want to use that and you didn't provide source, I feel like that's when you need to return the error. But
like the engine exists, but the source is missing, you're saying?
that's right. That's what that validation is. That's the error. If you go through the where that error is returned, it returns it if the source is not there. And again, that happens today for all Rego existing Rego stuff, right? Because we introduce source like code and source later, right? So anything today that is Rego and not specifically specifying, hey, I want to use K8s native validation, it will return that error. This is exactly that's the problem with that's the error that users reported, right? They're like, hey, I'm just using a regular Rego constraint template and I'm getting all these errors. That
But
doesn't
that's
make
the
sense. Yeah.
so that's the thing, right? Like, let's say that is the problem that exists today, right? Going forward, like all the, let's say a user has existing Rego templates, and a constraint author specifies, or let's say we enable VAP by default. That means we'll be using VAP enforcement points, right? At that point, for Rego policies, there won't be cell engine, but the intent is there to use the validating admission policy. So do we throw an error in that case, or a warning?
Right. So it's sort of like do you care about the intent of the constraint template author or do you care about the intent of the constraint author?
I would say the constraint author, right? Because like take the position of someone who is consuming constraint templates from the library, right? The constraint template author is like out of the operational loop there. Like we don't know the consumers of those, what kind of setup they have, if their clusters have VAP or not, whether they're interested in VAP. All of that comes from the configuration on the constraint, right? And so Gatekeeper tries to take the intent as written on the constraint and like render it effective. And if it can't, then it should give the user feedback. And we're in like a weird space right now where we're expanding the functionality of Gatekeeper, but we're trying to do it in a way where users don't need to take any affirmative action to say, yes, I want to use this feature. But as a consequence of that, right, their pre-existing configuration approach now indicates a broader intent that doesn't apply for all templates that they might use, right? And maybe they care about that, maybe they don't. Maybe they're gung-ho about VAP and they're like, I want to convert everything that can be VAP into VAP. Let me know if that's not happening. I want to know what the system's doing. Maybe they're not, right? But I think the thing is that if you don't surface those errors, right, if you try to just like do the thing that like looks smoothest in the short term, you basically run the risk of swallowing problems in the long term, right? Like, do you fail loud or do you fail quietly? And so my thought is that if our concern is that users will be overly distracted and think that these errors signal a problem for them when really it's not a problem for them, right? Like they're still getting the same enforcement they have, they're just not using this new feature. The solution is just to message that error a little better, saying like, hey, the way you've configured this constraint, you're trying to use VAP, that won't work for this constraint. If you want to get rid of this error, you can. I don't know how much hand holding or where we want to do the hand holding, but that would kind of be my preference there. So that users who do want to use VAP and don't want to configure scoped enforcement actions, because we've removed that story from consideration earlier discussions. They shouldn't be surprised if they're not using VAP.
I do remember talking about like coming up with a schema or appropriate warning message to show on constraint status when VAP enforcement point is not getting used a while back.
I think it's more of a concern when we default to VAP enforcement, right? In some sense, it's like when we introduce VAP, it's like, hey, user, now you can use both. But then if you default to VAP enforcement point, you're basically saying you don't really do both. You're like, I guess users could change the default to whatever the constraint says, right?
That's, so that's where we can define priorities, right? Like if VAP, we default to VAP, VAP is used by default. If VAP cannot be used, then we use gatekeepers webhook. Like we did
Yeah,
with
except you
cell
see these errors.
Where is this either or coming from? I thought we removed that behavior. Like if users expressed both enforcement points, we would just use both enforcement points.
That's
yeah,
just
but if
enforcement action, right?
Yeah. So, but it wasn't either or, right? It was like, so enforcement action is basically the equivalent of scoped enforcement action with a star for the enforcement point. And then if users wanted to only use VAP or only use uh, admission webhook.
Sure. The default is star, yes.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So so where is this option where users can say use one or the other, and computer you choose? I am not choosing which one.
I thought that's the scope enforcement action, no? Wait, I'm getting confused now.
But I think in that case, user explicitly says that, hey, I only want
Yeah,
VAP. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, it's scope enforcement point, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So if I say, no, I don't have an issue with if scope enforcement point. I think whatever user says, we should just return error because they say they want VAP and you don't have, sources for VAP. Totally makes sense. It's more the concern where users don't say what they want, and then we default to, hey, we default to VAP is enabled, VAP is a enforcement point. That's where you basically will dump the errors for existing regos, right?
Right, but I think that's actually instructive, right? Like I agree that you want to get out in front of the problem of like not scaring users that there's some kind of regression. Um, but it might be helpful for them to know that, oh, their intent has changed, right? Uh, like the way they've written their constraints, technically it's including VAP enforcement in the actions that they would like Gatekeeper to take. and gatekeepers just informing them, hey, if you were thinking this was happening, it's not.
Yeah, sorry, let me rephrase what I'm saying. Again, I'm more concerned about the backward compatibility, right? Is when the user doesn't do anything, right?
Right.
They will start seeing those errors.
Yes. And that's why
and I feel like that's like as a project, we're basically saying we are going to throw errors unless you use VAP. That's kind of mandating the VAP experience rather than opt-in. It's like opt-out basically.
Well, that's where I say it comes down to packaging, right? Like, yeah, if users see an error and it's like, oh, this error needs to go away because it's a problem, how do I get rid of this error? Then yeah. If it is an advisory kind of message saying like, we don't know how seriously you want to take this, just know that this thing is not happening. You decide whether you care or not. That's different. And so what that looks like, right, if that means softening the text and just giving some instructions like, hey, this is a warning, this only applies to VAP, everything else works, you're good, unless you care, or whether that's it must live in a different field. Well, I think that depends on, what your opinion as to like backwards compatibility is, right? Like, do we consider um, the error field as like a salient point of backwards compatibility, right? That are users taking action or not based off of a completely empty errors field, or is it more of a human readable thing?
I mean, depends on how people treat the error field, to your point. If they're really reacting to the error field like, oh, there's something wrong, then that could be a problem, right? Because you're basically saying as a project, we are saying that is the way to go, and in order to not get these errors, you have to opt in. You have to change your existing stuff.
Well, I mean, so that if they don't want those errors, they would one, those errors should be worded not as like necessarily errors, as I said, but two, there's two options, right? They could use VAP, accurate, or they could scope their enforcement actions, right? And let us know.
Yeah,
I'm
but
cool
that's
not
work
using
for
that.
them, right? That's the point. It's work. Like it's extra work. If they do nothing, they will see these errors.
Or they could disable VAP entirely, right? Or they could do nothing and get the same functionality, right? It's the only thing that's changing is the presence or absence of an error, right? Like their actual the product behavior has not changed. And that's I take your point that in a strict sense, like if you have some sort of automation on top of the API where you're reading the errors field, right? And you're like sending an alert if it's non-empty, right? Then softening the text doesn't really help it be a drop-in replacement. Um, so maybe we want a different field like warnings or something like that. But
Yeah, +1 on a new field, just to not mess with the existing how people handle how people use the error field today.
but yeah, that as opposed to like swallowing the error.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree. Yeah, I think we don't want to swallow, but it's like how do we present it without requiring existing users to do stuff, right? I'm trying to make it easier for people to transition. I think if we just dump all this on people, like they're not going to be happy. Like without them doing anything, I mean. Yeah.
I mean, I I agree with you in the abstract sense, but if I take a comparison to something like um, Caverno or just straight up adopting raw VAP, Gatekeeper's migration story in terms of level of effort is already much, much lower, right? Like Caverno requires you to straight up rewrite your policies to use VAP. Like if you don't care, you don't need to do anything, sure.
But that's the difference here is if I don't opt in, I will get the errors. This is not about making it easier for people to transition to VAP. It's making it non-work, like it does not require any work for existing policies. Does Kyvernal do that? Like, does it basically say if you're not using VAP, you'll get errors?
But if you're not interested in VAP with Gatekeeper, just don't enable it. Don't enable generation. And you wouldn't get those errors either.
But users won't have choice when we move to beta, right? Like they will need to explicitly disable the generation.
Sure. But like I don't think changes in the configuration surface are a backwards compatibility concern, right? The changes to the API surface are, but saying like, hey, when upgrading Gatekeeper, think about whether you want to set this flag value. Here's the impact of it. That's like, I mean, what does Kubernetes do there, you know?
Well, are we okay with the warning? It sounds like we are converging on that, right? Like
I'm fine with a warning, but you know, just as a like competitive note, right? Like if we like are trying to figure out the trade-off of effort versus value, right? Like warning is more effort to deliver maybe a better user experience. You know, there's still this edge case of, okay, what about people who explicitly say that? Wouldn't they want to see an error instead of a warning? You know, so you're never going to completely kill these edge cases. And so there's a question of, okay, well, how much do we care about backwards compatibility now, right? When we have options for backwards compatibility.
Backward compatibility.
Oh, geez, sorry, my phone is thinking I'm talking to it. Versus, you know, what is the actual competitive landscape that we live in, and what are users' expectations, you know?
right, but the problem with the turning off at the like the default, as you said, right, for existing Rego users, right, they could just turn off at the default value and then not enable that it as the default value, right, not generate that at all. While that is true, if that same setup they want to enable some people to slowly roll out that, then each one of those would have to explicitly do that in their constraint template constraint, right? So
if they cared about the warnings and the errors, right? Like that's the thing. Warnings and or errors. Like I truly am fine either way, but I think it's important to note the trade-off of, okay, well, now we're getting a warning where we may expect errors, and also we're adding a new field.
I think we all align on not swallowing the error, right? I think it's just I'm really concerned about. I'm pretty sure existing consumers do treat the errors with some like they actually use the errors, right? They report on it and whatever. So if we start doing this, it could actually misclassifying those existing regos as something as wrong, which is not the intention here.
Do we
And
want
like you said, go
sorry.
ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, do we want to classify them as like info instead of like warning or error?
As long as it's a new field. Like I'm concerned that we're using the existing field because people use that field to classify is this a bad policy or not. And I think that's not the intention here. It's only a bad policy if you're actually using that.
Right. I mean, this is more like in like informational, right? This is not like a, hey,
It
you have to
depends.
take an
If you
action.
are using that, it's not informational. It is actually, I want to know it. That's the
Then,
tricky
yeah,
thing.
we won't have information if it's like intended or not intended to
Right.
make the
But
decision of whether this is warning or error.
we do know if they're using web. Could we then say if using web, error, if not using web, informational?
Wait, you need to more clearly specify using that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean, Surtash, by
So
using that?
is it the issue is it with the web gen or with this web cell or both?
So the issue is that the intent to use VAP is stored in the constraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're effectively expanding the semantic meaning of the enforcement action field by saying that, okay, enforcement action without scoped enforcement action is equivalent to scoped enforcement action star, right? And so users get sort of like swept along where previously when they just had enforcement action, they're like webhook audit, got it. Now we're adding generate, right? And whether VAP is included in the set of enforcement actions is what gates that intent to perform that generate action, right? Because if you want to use enforcement, if you want to use VAP, you need to generate a binding, basically. And if you don't, you shouldn't. Um, and so that's all well and good, except now there's this alignment concern of it only really makes sense to generate VAP if you have a constraint template with VAP source code, right? And so what we're doing is we're basically saying if the template doesn't have VAP source code, don't generate VAP. But then there's like a chicken and there's a problem here of, okay, that for users who like have Rego templates, they're like, well, obviously, right? And I'm just using VAP. I'm just starting to use VAP. Why are you breaking me, right? Versus, I would argue there's a brownfield concern where users expect to use VAP and Gatekeeper is not, or whichever particular constraint is not configured to use VAP, right? It doesn't have the right language. They would be negatively surprised to discover that their intent is not being honored on the constraint. And so it's really a backwards compatibility issue. I think there's a fair question about does the what are the backwards compatibility concerns of like globbed fields basically as platforms like expand in capability? Like, I'm not sure that's something that the KRM backwards compatibility guides discussed, which is, I think, why we have like this kind of intractability is that there's this coupling of intent to platform capabilities.
I still this is confusing. Yeah. This is all because we have the wild card for enforcement points. If we didn't have that, then it's not like if users have to explicitly say that, then you know exactly what they want.
Right. Well, it's technically because we decided to allow use of VAP without specifying scoped enforcement actions, which kind of makes sense because we needed some way to translate scoped enforcement actions into, or sorry, enforcement action into scoped enforcement action, right? Because that is a backwards compatibility concern for KRM.
Right.
Like, I'm fine with the warning field approach. Like, in some ways, this is just more like an academic and interesting discussion because it leads to like how much effort are we willing to put into some of these like edge cases,
Right.
right, in light of like the competitive landscape, and also sort of where are we drawing those trade-offs, because there's a time-based trade-off of future suitability versus suitability in the now.
That's right. And hopefully it's just like a migration pain. Like if it's a say bad solve error, like it would be in the error field anyway. So from that perspective, it's the same behavior that we have with Rego today, right? The only thing that is new about this warning field is you will only see this if you unintentionally want to use VAP or not want to use VAP, and then there's a misalignment. So I feel like this warning field is just a temporary thing, and it's only meant to catch these type of situations. Whereas like the general errors will still go to the errors field, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's also an interesting point of, if we zoom out and think about the problem in the abstract, this is an unsuitability of a constraint for a given enforcement mechanism, right? This is a constraint, needs Rego, VAP doesn't have Rego, ergo that constraint is not suitable for VAP. How do you let the users know, right? And you can imagine other instances of this. Like let's say we do that other design doc I had where we make the enforcement points more specific, right? We have an admission enforcement point where we expect there to be a requesting user, requesting verb, all of that stuff. So users can actually do match criteria against those things. In that scenario, it would be inappropriate for audit to evaluate those constraints, right? It would be inappropriate for Gator to evaluate those constraints because those enforcement points do not have those contacts. So this is maybe our first instance of that specific problem.
Yeah, growing pain.
Yeah. Which I think maybe that does mean a new field is appropriate, right? Because this is kind of like an expected class of problem.
Exactly. Actually, this warning should be there for all the like intention where I want to use a certain engine or enforcement action, and it's like not, I don't, in the constraint template, that's not what I have, right? That warning is sort of like, hey, there's a mismatch between your constraint and constraint template, basically. I think that's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah. And as I pointed out, like not even necessarily the constraint template. It could just be the constraints and the enforcement point. Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So okay, cool. So Jade, are you clear on adding a new field then? Yeah. What do we want to call the field?
I
Well,
also remember like
huh?
having this similar conversation beforehand for like developing error schema or like a structured field for VAP related warnings and error. So do we want it to be a field or do we want it to be
I I think a field, I think we could even make this one structured. This is like a notice of unsupported enforcement points.
Right.
And in this case, VAP is not support or not applicable enforcement points. Like I don't know what the right verbiage is, but basically, hey user, you told me to enforce constraint over here. That makes no sense to me. I'm not going to do that. You should probably know that. Um, Anyone have any nice, concise words for that notion?
Uh, so this is about supportability. This is about enforcement point.
Yeah, this is honestly just a feedback thing, right? Like this is a user has asked us to do something that makes no sense with the inputs. We're just letting them know that. Like, hey, you said you wanted to audit this thing, but you say I should look at old object. That doesn't exist on audit. You should know that there's no world where this policy gets evaluated on audit. You should either change your policy or change your expectations.
Maybe enforcement point status. It's a structure. It's a struct about the status, right? For the enforcement points that they want to use, right?
I
It's
I
too
think
long.
it's more specific. Is it good?
Uh, it's more specific than that.
Yeah, like it's like incompatible enforcement points. Maybe.
Oh no, I mean that's
Oh,
instance of the status. Like the status could be everything's fine, right? The status could be you have a mismatch, incompatible, or the status could be something else. The nice thing about the struct is we can expand later, right? Actually, it would be really nice to know that the enforcement point status is good. We don't have anything like that.
This
like hey,
under status?
No, oh, I mean under the big status,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Should it be just called enforcement points or enforcement point status? The status will be.
Well, I won't. I mean, if you just say enforcement point, that's confusing because it's like because we have enforcement points elsewhere too.
Yeah, but
But
it is
really, it's a
under status
status
that, yeah,
of the enforcement points, right?
right.
we
Anyway, I don't
probably
care about the actual words. I'm just saying it's
yeah.
for enforcement points, right?
Yeah, this probably should belong under bipod, just because like
I
webhook, you could have different statuses for different webhook pods. Which is fine. That's just, one layer deeper.
is this a beta blocker then?
is a what?
Is
Oh,
this a
beta
beta blocker?
for I mean
Generation?
for VPAP generation.
Yeah, yeah.
What's beta? We expect backwards compatibility for Rita's point. I mean,
We're late on release R for RC, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we can like. Is there some interim thing we could do that's cheap and easy here? Like we could just swallow the error, I guess, for now. Uh, like I don't like that long term, but if this is a fast follow,
I'm okay with that.
Because yeah, adding this field, that's backwards compatible.
But if you were to test, this is the time to test. If you add this for beta, it's going to be harder to change it. Ugh.
We do have one more release until we get to beta, right? For VAP generation, because we added this generate operation, or do we want to move to beta
I thought this was
3?
this was the last release before beta. So if 3.19 will be beta.
Okay.
So this is actually a good time to add. It is my point.
Hmm.
Sorry, can you explain why this has to be on bipod? I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand.
because there's like the webhook pods, for instance, right? If they ever decide to report enforcement point status, they will have different pods, right? Or let's say you separate out the audit pods and the generation operation, right? The audit pod is going to have feedback on like, I don't, you're trying to use requesting user. That's not a thing for me, right? And then VAP would, you know, and you don't want them both writing to the same.
Right. Hmm. I mean, then let's do it now, right? We'll add this to add the enforcement point status to bipod maybe, and then it would have this is the enforcement point. This is the status, right? Status could be okay. Status could be, here's the error, the error that we don't want to swallow, right? Could that be a start? And then we can expand. And that would mean probably like at the earliest next week would be the RC. It will take time to review.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't strike me as hard to add, at least, right? Because this is just we already have a mechanism for writing to the status resource.
Yeah.
Thoughts, Jay? You're the one on the hook for.
I can get to it. Do you want, I'll follow up with a PR probably and not modify anything on the existing one if that's okay.
Oh
uh,
yeah, I think
I'm sorry.
that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
we can
get this
also
one merged.
we can also just shift the release a bit. Like I don't think there's like an urgency on the release if you want to make it sure it's done.
If you could add like a comment to, I think yes to the shifting the release, Ritesh. But yeah, if you could add a comment, Jay, on your current PR saying, "Hey, this is where it will go," just because otherwise, I think the current PR will be swallowing the error, which yeah.
Okay, I think we're over time. Are we good to go?
Yeah, slightly. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one last thing. Uh, we could discuss the structure and everything on the PR itself. Like I'll have like something that works, and then we could think about names and whatnot. Does it work? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So sounds like probably RC next week then. Probably, yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
I don't think David's PR is pretty much. I think Max, it'd be good if you just review it real quick again.
Yeah. I have a
I think
meeting
we're
after.
really
So
close. Yeah.
I'll review it today for sure.
Okay.
Next week is KubeCon, so
I mean, it's RC, right?
yeah, so we're good to just checking.
And also, I think I'm the only one that's actually going to KubeCon, so
Yeah.
I think it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good to see you all.